Recording. All right, 50mm f2 Summicron version 4. Let's talk about it. I'm Renton Vlogs, aka the Super Mediocre, and I'm just gonna tell you my thoughts on this lens while I show you photographs that I've taken with it. Additionally, in the description down below, there will be a link so you can download some photos taken with this lens and a Leica M240 to get a better idea on how this lens renders out different photographs, and you can play around with them in post to get a better feel on if this lens is ultimately right for you. And without further ado, let's jump right into talking about this lens. So the 50mm f2 Summicron version 4, in my opinion, if you buy it used, is one of the more affordable Leica lenses you can buy. They do make an APO version of this lens. It is outrageously expensive. That's just the reality. Do I think the cost is justifiable for the product? That's going to be subjective. I obviously went with the cheaper version of the lens. And I gotta say, this is probably my favorite street photography lens to shoot with, only to be superseded by the 35mm 1.4 Summilux, and that's only because the 35mm 1.4 Summilux does a little bit better in low light, and I'm a snobby dude and I like to be able to shoot in those really low light situations. If you close it to an f16 aperture, you'll start to notice any grime and dirt on the lens that may exist. I've had that issue with this lens. I thought it was the sensor initially. It wasn't. It was the lens. I had to get it cleaned. Not a big deal at all. But in terms of this being an f2 lens, I don't find myself limited to getting out there and shooting in most situations. If the sun is set, it's probably not gonna be the best lens to use. If the sun is still out, even if it's twilight or the sun's rising, you're gonna have more than enough light to shoot with this lens and capture really good photographs. It's also really compact, really subtle. It doesn't stand out, doesn't add a ton of weight to the camera. It's not gonna make it top heavy. So in terms of balance, using it with an M-mount camera, it feels really nice. It doesn't have the notch on the bottom like the more expensive version does, but that's okay. It's perfectly easy to control, and if you're zone focusing or range focusing, that's the proper term, damn it, range focusing, not zone focusing. I have no idea where zone focusing came from. And if you're shooting at a higher f-stop like an f11 or an f16, it's gonna be really easy to use, assuming you do have that amount of available light. And that's really nice. You're not gonna be obstructing people in their natural element. I find myself shooting street photography with it all the time. I've used it at a number of different concerts. So when I'm not using the Leica SL2S or the Canon EOS 1DS Mark III with the 85mm 1.2 USM2 lens, this is gonna be my go-to. And the other two cameras have their specialties. I think the Leica SL2S, yes, I know I said I sold it. I ended up getting it again because I did miss it. Sue me. And the 85mm 1.2, or the 85, that up again. And the Canon EOS 1DS Mark III, hands down, with the 85mm 1.2 lens, is also one of my go-to photography cameras for concerts. And that's where I found myself missing the Leica SL2S, because I know you can do this with a lot of cameras, but you can focus the camera to lock onto a subject and then kind of pan away. So you're in focus over here, and this is all blurred out. I forget what that feature's called, but it's a feature I used more than I thought, and I wanted it back. But regardless of having a designated photography camera for concerts, which I have the two, I always have a Leica M240 with a lens, and that lens is the 50mm f2 Summicron version 4. So that's always with me. It's my everyday carry. So it's whatever I'm shooting with as a primary, this is gonna be my backup. Or if I'm shooting street photography, it is my primary camera, it is my primary lens setup. You could use it for fashion photography too. I haven't really done much of that. Where I live now is not really people aren't as accessible per se as they are in New York and LA. It's a little different. It's the South. Things move slower. It's tougher to meet people. And I'm getting old. I'm not old, I'm still young at heart. I use it at a comedy club all the time as well. And at the comedy club, it's a much lower light situation. However, the stage is obviously well lit, So you do have some primary lighting, and that is ultimately what you need when shooting with an f2. But the colors and tones that this lens helps render out are what, in my opinion, makes it really special and makes it stand out from a lot of other options available for M-mount cameras, in addition to it being somewhat cost effective for a Leica lens. Buying it new, you're still gonna be around $3,000 to $3,500 after taxes and all that wonderful jazz, depending on what state you live in. If you live in California, you're probably looking at $45,000, $50,000 with the amount of taxes they throw on it. But who knows? If you live anywhere else, you're looking at about $3,000 to $3,500 new. Used, I paid around $1,600 plus tax, so right under $1,800, which I think's really fair for the lens and the quality that this lens is capable of producing. So it gives you that stereotypical Leica look, whatever that means. Obviously, that's going to be subjective. But when I think of a Leica camera, when I think of a Leica lens, when I think about particular types of looks, this is a lens and lens camera combo that does help me produce what I'm ultimately seeing in my mind and want to present to the world. And to me, that matters more than anything else. It matters more than the lens itself. It matters more than the camera body. It's just, am I capable of producing what I want, what I'm seeing up here, and then delivering that back? And the answer is yes. Yes, I am. Whether you like it or not, different story. But it helps me create the types of images I want to create. And that's what matters. And that's what ultimately should matter to you too. Is it hitting your personal standard? And for me, this definitely does hit my personal standard, and that's why I love it. The only thing I don't like about it, I kind of prefer detachable hoods versus hoods that I prefer detachable hoods versus the pop-out hoods. I just don't like that. Obviously, that's subjective. There's nothing wrong with it. I swallowed a bug. So one of the things people talk about when they talk about opening up the lens all the way is, how's the bokeh? Which I could honestly care less about in most situations. But what makes this lens special, specifically the version 4, if you look into it, it does have this ultra creamy effect when you open up the lens to be fully open, which is nice. So it really gives this nice definition and separation from the background with regards to your subject that is very similar to much more expensive higher end in quotes, lenses that you could ultimately buy. So from a cost value proposition for the quality it's able to produce, I do think it's ultimately the best lens for the price point that's made by Leica. That is a 50mm. But if you want to know if it has great bokeh, I think it does. I asked some random dude on the street, can I take his photo? Really nice guy. His name was Galaxy. And, you know, I carry around the photo when I shoot street photography, so if I see him, I can give him a copy of the photo because he really liked it. I think that picture demonstrates the bokeh that this lens is capable of executing really well. And it's obviously a subjective medium, but identifying equipment can always be difficult. I'm not particularly drawn to 50mm lenses to begin with. I have some lenses in mind, obviously the Noctilux, but, you know, tax season. It's one of the best lenses I've personally used. Nifty 50s are popular for a reason. They're super versatile. You can use them in a myriad of different situations. And this being an f2, you're not going to be limited for the most part. In some cases, if the sun's set or the sun is just rising or you're in really low light situations and you don't have a flash, it's going to be questionable on if you're going to be able to hit your shots. But generally speaking, it does a really good job even in those low light situations. Now I typically shoot with 1.4s and I have not found myself limited by this lens in most of the same situations that I throw myself into shooting with a 1.4. Now, there are shots that I would not be able to get with this lens, some of those being at concerts, documenting the crowd and documenting what the crowd's doing. Those are gonna be tougher to hit at an f2. You're gonna kind of have to wait for the light to pan across the crowd to really snag your shot. But with a 1.4, you don't really have to wait for that, which is nice. The 50mm f2 Summicron version 4, I think it's the best bang for the buck for a Leica 50mm lens. Hands down, without question. bite me in the comments. No, don't really. I'm sensitive, kind of. Not at all, actually. So one other thing, reasons I like shooting with a rangefinder and a lens like this versus something like a Leica SL2S beyond the form factor. The SL2S, super clean photographs. The Canon EOS 1DS Mark III has more of this like film-like aesthetic, which I think is really cool. This camera, rangefinders tend to have a little bit more grit. To me, that kind of pulls you into the photograph. It's more of like a photojournalism-esque aesthetic per se, and it feels more authentic and real, and I like that feeling versus like an overly polished photograph like the SL2S delivers, which was my primary reason to not use the SL2S as my primary street photography camera. I don't really care about the form factors of cameras in terms of like if I have to point a massive machine in somebody's direction. Obviously you don't want people to notice you, and that's gonna make it more likely that they'll notice you, but this is subtle, discreet. It gives that nice like gritty aesthetic. Not that the photo's dirty, but it has like this more authentic feel to it. And I love that about this. And it has that Leica look. Obviously, depending on how you edit your photos, that Leica look may be a little different or a little subjective. The Leica look to each of us is gonna be, to an extent, subjective. What they publish in their galleries and on Instagram could ultimately be deemed the actual Leica look. Yeah, I love it. There's not much camera equipment I can hate on. There's so much that's good that's been released since 2007. A few cameras here and there slip by and I'm like, yeah, probably should have rethought that one. But generally speaking, you're not going to go wrong with a lens like this. So if you're thinking about this lens, obviously if you have the money and you want to buy it new, there's nothing wrong with that. You're just gonna pay 40 to 50% more for, well, no, my math is terrible. Thank you, math teachers in high school and college. You're gonna pay almost double the price if you're gonna buy it new, but you can get it for about half the price if you buy it used. And I always recommend buying it used. Just do your research on where you're buying it from. There's different retailers that sell this lens. It's not a difficult lens to find, you know. But yeah, so that's a pretty quick summary and my perspective on the 50mm f2 Summicron version 4 lens. I think it's an excellent lens. If I was gonna rate it out of 10, you know, probably just a 9 out of 10, given that the only place you're going to find a limitation is where you really get into those low light situations where you do need a faster lens. I don't know what else. I think that about wraps it up. That about covers my thoughts on this lens. Beyond that, I'm gonna be out of it for like 2-3 weeks for, I gotta get like surgery again on my jaw. Shit happens. Gotta get some teeth removed. You know, those damn facial infection things. Should've got the root canal. Decided not to. Paying for it now. Figuratively and literally. Woohoo. Anyways, during that time, for that 2 to 3 weeks, I'll be releasing shorts. I'll be releasing a narrative video that covers like my use of different cameras and why I think cameras are cool. And I'll be dropping a zine. And that'll be my first zine. I do think I'm gonna make it like an open edition zine where it's not limited in the quantities that come out. So if you're into photography, if you're into street photography, this covers a lot of LA, a lot of the East Coast. Started shooting some documentary content with some people that are local, involving like the local tattoo artists, local comedians, and that stuff just takes longer than expected to get out. The street photography content that I want to cover, it's hard to link up with the subject that I'm working with. Super cool dude. His name's Jamal Joseph. You can check him out on Instagram. Great photographer, does street, fashion, super high level, super solid photographs, primarily shoots with a Nikon ZF, I believe, and a few other cameras. So yeah, buy a zine, support this channel, help me avoid ever having to do ad reads, because I love those as much as you do. And yes, I do have people reach out, and so far, I've turned every single one of them down, primarily because I don't use their products. The only products I do use are like small rig stuff. Their stuff's pretty great. They haven't reached out to me. I'm not bitter. Maybe I'm a little bitter. Anyways, I'm Renton Vlogs, aka the Super Mediocre. This has been a quick check-in with the Leica 50mm f2 Summicron version 4 lens. Hope you enjoyed the photographs that you saw. There's that link in the description down below, including sample images taken with this lens and a Leica M240. Request access, and give me a few days. I get a lot of emails. Sometimes I miss them. Just follow up if I do. And I'll grant you access to download those photos, and you can play around with them in post and get a better idea on if this lens/lens camera combo is ultimately right for you. Anyways, I'll talk to you soon. Stay on the lookout for that zine. Support street photographers. Peace.